All right.
Are we live?
Yeah, I think so. Mine says it's live. It says Instant Juggler is recording the call.
No, I was just quoting Jim Rose. Are we live?
Are we live?
Oh no, that's Penn and Teller on the SNL when they hang upside down.
Oh yeah, yeah. Are we
Doesn't
live?
Jim,
Yeah.
but Jim
It's
Rose
it's
he
Penn
doesn't
and no, it's Penn and Teller. Yeah, when they're hanging upside down because they need to tell everybody that it is live,
yeah,
so that the trick actually works. I
yeah.
mean, we don't ever want to tell. You don't want to blow that one by saying that they're hanging upside down because that was what was so incredible about it.
Yeah, but yeah, but I'm not going to say which one they were hanging upside down in, so it could be any of them. So I
Yeah,
didn't.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. Could they do that incredible upside down straitjacket escape where Penn is reading a poem and Teller is up doing
Oh yeah, yeah. The Casey at the bat.
Casey at the bat, but they wanted to read like the birth of a baby dove in the ghetto, and they weren't allowed to, so they had to do some more entertaining stuff.
Yeah.
Hugely influential on myself, I must say.
Yeah, what a good yeah. Hey man, so I wanted to talk to you because I realized a couple days ago that it's been 1 year since we really actually dived into the depth of the creation of this show we made together, this Reflex thing. And I mean, we started, what was it? The summer of 2020 was like my first phone call to you. And then we did a couple of, I mean, we touched base a few times in the autumn, right? But then right before Christmas, we did a couple of pre sessions, like kind of pre-planning that were kind of more from your direction of like, hey, let's do something like this. And then I remember you reached out to me and you were just like, hey, let's just do every Monday, Friday, jump on Zoom or whatever messenger we use, messenger video, and do some sessions. And then we started January, and that was January 2021. And now
Yeah.
and now we're January 2022. And now I'm going to New York in a couple of
Yeah,
days.
yeah.
So with a show that exists, that's finished.
Yeah, we've created a monumental piece of work, I would say. But it's really interesting as well, like because when you say it's like, oh, we'll get together on some Mondays and Fridays, but it wasn't just getting together on some Mondays and Fridays. It's I don't know how many months we did 2 days a week
Yeah.
of 2 to 3 hour sessions. So we were sort of working 5 hours or more a week on this thing, and then in between, still on Messenger, firing back. First, in the beginning, it was just sort of text things, and then we discovered the 1 minute recording. You can record a voice message.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many of those we did then and continue to do, where there's literally like 15 or 20 of those 1 minute bits where you're just like free forming, go, oh, I was just thinking of that section of the show when we're doing this.
Yeah.
Which,
But I want to ask you a couple of questions about starting a year ago, but just to say the main feeling, if I put myself 1 year in the past, my main feeling of that time was being completely lost, but like purposefully lost. Because I always put that on myself. I'm like, oh, I'm making a new show, so it has to be new and different. And to get a different result, you have to have a different process. And so then I willingly pretend that I'm completely, I don't know how to make a show and what are we doing and what is juggling and what do words even mean? And then, but then I remember we go through those Mondays and Friday sessions and I was pretty lost, again, like in an enjoyable way, I guess, but still searching to what was the next step. And I really remember this thing of like, we had this rhythm every Monday and Friday, and that was something to look forward to in terms of a structure of a momentum of the next step of a process. But then we would get to a point where it was like, okay, now Jay, you need to go away and you need to transcribe, this many hours of recordings. So let's skip Monday because you're not going to be caught up yet. And I really remember this feeling of relief. Not that I didn't have to talk or get to talk to you on the Monday or Friday, but more that I had a task in front of me that was known. Like it was a lot of work to just transcribe, 10 hours of voice recordings. I mean, it was insane looking back on it.
yeah.
But it was a concrete task that only took my time and energy. It didn't take my fantasy. And there was a real relief in the break of that rhythm. And so it was kind of like we would get to some place where we finally knew what we were going to do. Okay, the next step is, Jay, you need to make these notes and then we need to do X, Y, and Z. And I was like, oh, thank goodness we have something concrete to do. But as soon as that got done, we would dive into the next session when that work was finished, and then you were I was lost again. And I really remember this rhythm of like completely lost, and then you find something, and then you're lost again, and then you find something, and it was this really roller coaster process for me. And I don't know, how did you feel the same thing? Or
Yeah, I mean, that's right. And I guess maybe I have some questions for you about that, but it's like part of my process too. Is like you dive into this idea and you go, and at some point during that session, and sometimes it would be at the end of the session, sometimes it'd be in the middle of it, and you really come to, well, that is the end of that idea. We've gone on an exploration and it goes out. And especially in the beginning, I find there's this sort of like an expansion and then a contraction. Eventually it'll be a kind of concretization as you do it again, but it's like well, it comes alive again, because we have an idea and then it just expands out, and it's all sorts of possibilities. And what does this trigger in your brain? What does it trigger in my brain? And it's all this sort of, and then that happens on the session and it feels really big, and you feel like, oh man, we just nailed that thing. That was incredible. And then afterwards it goes, okay, now what did we actually create here? What, because one thing is all those ideas and the feelings of awesomeness and how clever we've brought these things together. But the other thing is, light comes on, you're on the stage, what is actually happening? And that's what that transcription process did. And it has in my process of working like I'm working with you, or have been working with you, I now stress that so hard. You have to look through the thing, the session that we've done. If you look through that and transcribe out the bits of script that we did and fill into another document what we said you were going to do and everything, that process, which feels hard, but it's hard because it's laborious. And when you're an artist, you like to just fly around in your dreams and your imagination, but to concretize this thing of going, all right, curtain goes up, you're on stage, now what? You need to continually put that, and that's like a linear process, because whenever we're talking, it's wide, it's connecting to everything in your mind, and it's a sort of three-dimensional thing, but it becomes two-dimensional when it's on the paper, and that's hard. But you doing that, and hats off to you doing it, because we did so many sessions before we really did that, where we were talking about the process and what does juggling mean, and what is a word in relation to the three-ball cascade. Like it was some crazy in-depth epistemological like what is meaning, what can we know, what is, like, we really went really deep for hours first, and you transcribed it all and listened through it and solidified, and hats off to you for that. And that's why I think the show has grown, and I keep thinking of this word depth. It now has depth, and depth comes from it being a context. All the acts, all the different stuff that we've talked about, all sort of connects up to other things, not just within the show, but sends tendrils out throughout, and it's a rich package we've created. And I think that's from your hard work of that. So now you got to make it come alive again.
Well, I think
your presentations,
yeah, for sure. I think there's two things that come to mind immediately that I really appreciated about your working method, or about your style, or whatever, your habits or something. The first thing was that I realized pretty early on that when we were talking, I think we initially had set like, let's talk for an hour.
Yeah.
like, and then we pretty quickly realized that like 3 hours was more realistic or whatever. And part of that process I realized was, you especially, you repeat things very many times, but like in the best of ways. And that's why it first occurred to me to transcribe those recordings, because every time you would repeat the idea, a little new phrase would pop out that was just perfectly formed. And it was like you were in real time working through your thoughts and refining. And I'd say on average, we would talk about an idea, we would introduce the idea, and you would kind of give your first initial response. And then I would reflect, and then you would come back and kind of reformulate your initial response. And then I would respond to that. And then you would do a third iteration. And I wouldn't say each of those iterations, they didn't get more and more perfect just on their own, but in each of them, there was just a perfect turn of phrase that you would generally get to. And that's why when I was transcribing those interviews, I mean, it was like magic, because I would get to that one phrase that was just like, and I'm sure, I know for a fact, some of those phrases are verbatim. They are intact in the script to this very day.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's why I'm going, like, you have to always record the sessions, as Jack Black goes. It's like, always record. Anyway, that's a reference, but you record the session exactly because of those. The first few times when you're really jamming on an idea, it's so fresh and so naive, and you can often just really nail it down to really simple sentences, and then later on, as you continue to think about it, it expands and becomes sometimes too florid, or you lose track of it or whatever. So that's a really good point. But I also thought that it's similar, the similarity of doing what I'm doing with words and in creation. I think it's similar to how you do with your tricks. When you're doing new research to learn a trick, you're just freestyling or whatever. I mean, I have a very limited, because of COVID, we have spent so little time in a room in the creative process, that you did a lot of the physical stuff completely on your own, and then sending me a video and going, I've made this, and I'm not comment on that or whatever. So but still,
right,
you're experimenting, and then you find something and you go through it again, and then you go through it again, and then you refine it until there is no filler or whatever in between the tricks, where you're doing 7 or 10 throws to get yourself into position for the next one. So it's almost like maybe it's a similarity in that process.
I came to rely upon this process with you. I mean, we just did it most recently, where we wanted to tweak a little section of the script, right? We did 6 run-throughs in Stockholm in December to really workshop before we go to New York City. And after even the 6th run-through, there was still one little thing we wanted to tweak. And in my mind, I was like, I need to do a jam session with Frodo, because I could sit down on my own and try to suffer through tweaking this section. But I know if I call Frodo, I mean, I didn't tell you this, but you know how it is. I know if I call Frodo and I record a jam session with him, I'm going to get like 50% of my text is going to be written for me in those 3 hours. I just have to transcribe it. And that's what we did. And and it turns out that didn't exactly happen, but it definitely was the process that cracked that new, you know what I mean? So I came to rely upon kind of that method that we had worked together on. And I know you've been working with other people too on their shows. And you said, like, for example, you worked with another performer where you were more just literally writing the words entirely and writing the script, you know? And that's also from a year ago when I started working with you deeply on the project. We had to find out who we were to each other and how we both worked together. And I really remember that in January, trying to struggle to understand not only what the hell are we supposed to do next, but who are you and who do you think I am, and what value can you give me and what value can I give you? It was a real multi-layered thing. And I think that's why our discussions continued on, I mean, till today, right? There's just so much to work on.
True. I mean, I think all those, when you're doing a creative process with somebody, the first session, you can talk about your ideas or whatever to get an idea, but so much of it is also to work out those things. So I ask a bunch of questions now that I didn't do with you, because it was so, anyway, like to ask, like, who are you? What do you want to do with this show? And what do you want to be different? And what do you want to say with it? What do you want the audience to feel? What do you want, like, before we start even to talk about, just to get some ideas of where we're going, and also, like, what kind of input do you want from me?
There has to be a context, because like I'll get messages, you know, once a month on Facebook or email, and somebody's like, hey, I just made this video, can you give me some comments, you know, juggling video. And I'm always like, I've learned over the years, because it just happens. I mean, throughout my life, this has happened. I mean, especially with social media coming into play, you know, and I've learned over the years to give some sort of response that is maybe useful. But for the most part, when people come to me and they show you something with no context, they just go, look at this. What do you think? What do you say? You know, you have no idea what they want to do. What's their intention? What's their goal? What's their parameters? Like, you have no idea. And I hate it. It's like kind of like you get a lot of circus school students. They'll come and say, oh, I made this thing in school. Like, do you have any suggestions? And I'm just like, no, I have nothing to say to you, because what are we working on here? And that's what you're talking about, as a context for the process.
I mean, it's also like, because if you're asking for advice, what I see sometimes when people who have whatever you want to call it, they're working on their piece and they're serially working with lots of different people, fellows from their class, or they're working with working with 4 different directors. It is that you get what's almost like when something is being created by committee. You please all the people all the time, and you lose track of what it is that you want, because you're getting strong points of view from lots of different people, and sometimes it's better to just make 80% of it completely sort of on your own or with one person, and then you know what this thing is, and it is easier to shape it from there.
Well, it's not even that you're losing sight of what you want. Generally, in that situation, you don't want anything. You're giving up responsibility to this other. You're kind of displacing it. So I'm working with 4 directors. It's not my problem, and I think there is a real difficulty to and again, in our relationship a year ago, how did we place each other in terms of the relationship of who is taking ownership of this process, who's taking ownership of the final product? And it's so funny, a little digression here, but like, I remember the producer, Josh and Lydsay from Hidaway Circus, and Josh was asking pretty recently, the past few months, hey, we need to get our titles together for the program, for the website. And, titles are very important in New York City, show business and creation and whatever. And so what is Frodo's title? He asked me. And I was just like, I don't know. I've been calling him the director, but like, I don't know what that means, especially in circus. In juggling, I don't know what that means. And then he was saying, well, did you and Frodo, so who made the show? And I was like, well, me and Frodo did. We made it together. We made it from these conversations together. And Josh said, how much of the text in the show did Frodo write? And I said, well, I mean, how can I answer that? You wrote everything and I wrote everything. I mean, there are literal phrases I can point to in the script now and say, Frodo literally said this. But at the same time, it was out of our conversation. I don't have responsibility for your words, but it was our meeting that made the show. And so who made what and what was our titles? I have no idea. But I just wanted to say really fast, the other quality before I forget. So I recognize this idea of you repeating things was very valuable in the process. And the second quality that I have to say surprised me, which I don't think I've ever told you this, was your practicality. Because we're recording this session right now. I mean, with the spirit that people might watch it and listen to us talk. And I think already there, this audience right now can understand that we talk very conceptually and very broadly and very, it's kind of goes crazy sometimes, like really big. But the other thing that I found really surprising from you and very useful was you were so practical. For example, one thing you love to keep in mind is how long things are. Like, you were asking me from the beginning, there was no show, there was nothing, and you're just like, but how long is that opening scene? And I'm like, I don't even know what the opening scene is. And you're like, yeah, but how long? Like, you were really onto the length of how long the show should be and the kind of overall rhythm of the length, and also how long it takes to say certain amounts of words. Like, you always say, it's 400 words, so it's going to take, X amount of minutes to say that. Can you speak a little bit about, like, what is your relationship between this completely expansive conceptual process and at the same time being practical? I think that's a unusual combination, I guess.
Well, I guess it's because most of the time when I am working, or like a big part of my schooling as a director or co-creator or somebody to pick someone's brain or whatever people say about this thing, can you be my outside eye, whatever that is, was from doing 12 years of La Soirée or La Clique. So I worked in that show as a kind of act doctor or act creator, and later on worked as a director on the second project that Brett Haylock made, Club Swizzle, in a much more expansive role. But the practicality also comes from this thing. You can't just sit backstage and talk about ideas. It's because I might have just met this artist. They have an act, and Brett needs some changes to happen to it. He assigned it to me to go and talk to them because people had a general, they trust me more than they do with the producer coming and talking. So there comes a fellow artist and we're talking, and that became also a thing within the show. I was someone to talk to, and it was a very good atmosphere. That some artists that came in, that all the other artists in the show would comment about your act and say, maybe you should do this. Some people found that really intimidating and got kind of angry, but that was kind of the vibe. But anyway, the practicality comes from when he says, can you do something to this act? And he always had very specific things that he wanted, even if he couldn't quite express it. He has a very sort of broad, like that, get it done. And then I would talk to them, and then the act would have to go on stage in 3 days or in 5 days.
Right.
Always have to make it happen. And this is also this idea that I get. Sometimes people come. I was doing a collaboration with someone, and they'd written 8 pages of single-spaced document, and they're just going like, here, this is my idea. And I'm looking through the whole thing, and I'm going, there's so many ideas and there's so much stuff here. But then this is, I already said it several times now, but it's this practicality thing. We're going, okay, curtain goes up, you're doing it. What are you actually doing now?
Right.
This one. And that can be said the same. It's like, okay, that opening act has happened. Now, what do you actually do? In yours, you open with like just dazzling people with your skills or whatever, get that happening, and then go, now, what do we do? Yeah. And then I keep also thinking, because knowing the more you can wrestle from of structural things from your act or from the topic at hand, the more specific and the less time you waste in creating it. If you know that this section of the show is going to be, well, it's not going to be 30 minutes. We know that. And it's not going to be 2 minutes. You're going to talk and you're going to do some actions and you're going to do some juggling. So this bit's going to be 7 minutes. There is only a certain amount of material that there's room for in there. It takes a while to explain an idea, as we know in this. So there can't be too many ideas in there. And this is something that I learned from you, this language of like how much novelty, how much newness needs to be put into a piece.
I call it new information. How much new information?
Yeah. I call it novelty, and like how much of that new information needs to come into the act to keep you fully engaged. And that really helps to shape it. And because I work a lot with words in my own acts, and I'm also a writer of stories and of essays and stuff, so, and I record my podcast, The Way of the Showman, so I am quite aware of how long it just takes to say certain things. Because sometimes people then come, okay, I have this. It's a 1 full page with like a single type space, and there's like 600 pages, 600 words or whatever. I'm going, well, that's going to take you at least sort of 6 minutes to say. And with any kind of actions or so. And so did you intend on talking for 6 minutes? And just simple things like that helps you.
Yeah. What is your, like, very practically, what is your metric? Is it 100 words a minute, or what do you usually think?
Yeah, 100 words a minute. When you're reading an audio book, you can read more or less, but in a performance situation where we are talking, you know, and how you're talking, you're not talking sort of directly with the microphone, and they're not listening like that. They're watching juggling and whatever. You can't speak super fast and just tell them all the things are going to go on. Usually you can't speed up much more than that. And then things might go in, but I use that as my normal thing. 100 words a minute. You can't say more than that. And as soon as you start doing actions, then that goes to the window, whatever.
I mean, I think it's kind of a rare combination of again, I've worked with people, and I am working with people who are super conceptual, and they're just in outer space all the time. And it's a wonderful, fantastical conversation that blows your mind, and you're just transported, and your mind is expanded, and you're, you know, having fun. But there's just no practical reality in those conversations. And it honestly drives me crazy, because you can go out to outer space. But for me, especially with juggling is concrete. You catch the ball or you don't.
Yeah.
So then if we go to outer space, but there's no grounding to that conversation, it drives me literally insane. Or then you'll meet other people who are super organized and super practical. And this is exactly to the second how long this is going to be. But there's no fantasy. There's no expansiveness of the concept. There's no depth to the idea. It's very surface level, one dimensional. So that you have this combination between this fantasy, this ability to expand and zoom out to the global universal perspective, but at the same time keep it rooted in the practical thing of, like you say, you're going to go on stage and do something. What's that going to be? I think that's a rare combination. And I was talking to Eric yesterday, and I wonder what you say about this, because I observed one thing in our conversation, and I said, well, normally you have people who have a lot of content. Like, I think Eric and we're the type of people who have a lot of content. We have content in our lives. We have so much techniques and ideas, and I'm not saying they're good or bad, but it's a lot. It's just a large volume of work. But we're not. But then there's another type of person who's very concerned with the experience of sharing something with an audience. Like, that's their main focus. And normally those people, in my experience, if I really generalize, they don't have any content because they're so focused on the delivery. They're all, you meet those people where they're like, I'm only here to connect with the audience. I'm only here to serve the audience. That's obviously not me and Eric. That's not our first intention. Our first intention is to create things from ideas. And so I find it very rare to meet a person who has both of those qualities. Somebody who's super concerned with delivering to an audience, but who also has something really deep to say. I think you're one of those people, like one of the rare people who has, that's why I pulled you. The whole conversation was, we were talking about this project, and I told Eric, that's why I called you to direct the show, because I became concerned about how to present these ideas to an audience. I didn't want to do the same thing I always did. I said, I want to care about this more. And I thought, well, there's only one person I know who I can call, and it was you. Do you have any sort of relationship to this idea about have a person who has a lot of content, or a person who is concerned with presenting it? And do you have a relationship?
Well, for one, it just rings really true. It's so true. It's like, if you're just looking at the caricatures of it, it's the person that goes, well, it doesn't matter if I juggle 5 or 4 balls. They don't know. They don't care. They don't know if I do this trick or that trick, because they're just going to eat the apple and do under the leg. And then they go, he's a juggler. Because there are always those two questions of going, what are you going to do? And then how are you going to present that? And those two questions always needs to go hand in hand, because you can, as in the worst case of the street show, where you just it's the same show you've seen before, and they all build it up, and do you want to see it? And in the end, I'm going to sit on the unicycle and juggle the fire. This is very, it's like you can sell that same sort of structure, and it doesn't have any content, and it's all about how you sell it, because you might still make a completely excellent living from that thing. So that's all about the how, but you want to do both things at the same time. You want to focus on the content. And I was thinking about that, of making it practical. It's because I am one of the few people, and people say this to me too, that I read, the books that I read are highly conceptual. It's philosophy, and like, I've just sort of the last year stumbled on continental philosophies, Heidegger and Gadamer and the phenomenologist, and I'm just like eating this up, and I'm going like, oh man, this wasn't really covered when I did a bit of philosophy at university. The history of Western thinking, I didn't go into this modern thinking, and now I'm like so excited. But then I find that these ideas that they talk about, they're so uninteresting to almost everybody, that if I ever am to talk about it at all, then it is through the creative processes, like with you. So my continuing going on about duration, and about the performer or the showman being a curator of time and attention, and that this is all also very much inspired by Henri Bergson, the very excellent French philosopher. So this gives me these frames to think about it. But the only way, like when I'm reading a book, and I'm going through it. I just wrote a little bit about duration. Like I underline and write notes in here, and all these things that when I'm underlining and noting, I am transforming or transcribing these ideas into stuff which is relevant to me, and that is showmanship. It's performing, it's creating acts and stuff. So whenever I'm reading, whether I'm reading history or I'm reading whatever, I always see it very deliberately, and more so in the last 5 years or so. I see the world like this, and then I go, how does this relate to me as an artist in creating stuff? So I take this abstraction process and make it concrete so that I can slip it into a conversation, because I think about these things, and then you're talking to a normal person who don't read these things for fun. If this is going to be interesting at all and is going to hold the conversation, it needs to be somewhat concrete and relate to something. So that's
one thing, again, going back to this conversation with Eric, and I should just say it's Eric Olberry, who I have my podcast Object Episodes with, in case there's a context here for this recording. But I think a quality he has is a quality you have, and I wonder what you say about this. I remember I asked you one time, I know you were into Rudolf Steiner, and I don't know much about Steiner. So I thought, I'm going to ask Frodo this one question. I've tried to search a little bit. I mean, I don't even know the question really, but it's something about, I heard Rudolf Steiner was into the Lost City of Atlantis, or some controversy about criticism of Rudolf Steiner, whatever. I don't even care, honestly. But I just thought I would mention to you because I knew you knew so much about Rudolf Steiner. And I thought, maybe Frodo has something interesting to say about Rudolf Steiner and the City of Atlantis or something. And I remember you telling me the answer, your answer. And what blew me away was that this idea that you said, yeah, well, there was some text that they wrote this in this year in this place. But at the same time, in Italy, this was happening, and in France, this was happening. And you have to understand that in Japan, this was happening at the same time. So those words actually meant this. And it's like you were this nexus. You were this, you were connecting. You weren't just reciting the facts of like, well, Rudolf Steiner wrote this in 1917 or whatever year. And you weren't just reciting facts to me. You were assimilating all these ideas in your head and making connections. And I think that's what Eric does with his work. You know, he pulls in all these different places from all over the world, and then he connects them in his brain, and that's the powerful part. Because until, you know, your answer to me about Rudolf Steiner, I never considered it before, because I had just heard the facts. I had just read Wikipedia, and there's something that goes on in your brain because you know all these different connections, and then it becomes more relevant. I mean, this is why I thought of this right now, because you're talking about reading a philosophy book, right? And then you're making it relevant to somebody who's not a hardcore philosophy fan, for example. Yeah. So what's going on in your brain, making all these connections and understanding the context again of these facts? I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah, one of the things there is like with Steiner is that I find him have a love-hate relationship with Steiner, because he's so full of like insane ideas, and he brings up things like Atlantis and all these things, which was all the rage at the time that he was alive, and like whatever, the theosophists and all this. So there's so much woo and so much fogginess around what he talks, yet he talks with great illumination about all kinds of subjects, and there's something about the way that he thinks about subjects which just keeps blowing my mind in small sort of ways, where I'm going like, I never thought of it like this, or like, okay, what is this? Is the guy that talks about how to keep bees and talks about the importance of the color red in interior design, or like he just talk about, you know, so much. So that's kind of interesting, and I am interested in these kinds of people who can talk about everything, like Alan Watts, or people who just rant on for long periods of time and it's making some sense of it. That's just interesting. Like, how did it get to be that this person can talk about almost any subject? I'm starting to think it's like it has to do with you have some firm point of view and a few things that is like, what's your metaphysics of reality? How do you see the world here? And then that's where it comes from. But anyway, So when I'm talking to you, I am battling with the fact that this person who has said so many incredible things about education, why is this guy also going on about the lost continents of Lemuria and Atlantis? When, like, why does your theory on these things pivot on something which I see as pseudoscience? So, or whatever you want to call it. So then when I'm talking to you, I'm protecting what I feel is interesting about this guy's thinking from all of that ridiculousness that I know is going on, and it's so easy to pick a hole at. But this is also what's so easy to pick a hole about in Christianity, or like in religion. You say, well, it's ridiculous that this story is in the Bible and then he did this, and you're going, yeah, but that's because this, to me, this is all symbolic, it's all metaphoric. And I don't read Steiner, or I don't read religion thinking that this was actually what was happening, this and that, and then he created this, and then but it's the incredible metaphorical and mythopoetic attempts at explaining something very difficult. So that's one thing. But this thing you say about input going in, that to me is the core of the artistic process. It's like I'm taking in all of ideas, I'm taking in inspirations for tricks, and I'm taking in the actions that I do in the space, and learning to modify my body by swallowing a sword, and then I take that inside myself, and now I have to transform that and bring it out either to an audience or to you when you're asking the question, and make this thing cool, relevant, sexy, exciting, whatever it is that we want to make in this show. So it's about that transformation. So it's the input that goes in and the transformation that's going on in us, and then the art output or whatever. So this validates all my reading, all my practice, all these things that I do. It's the fact that I then can stand up in front of somebody and show it, and it feels meaningful to them. And that process is what's meaningful to me. So there you go. That's a win-win situation.
Well, I'm glad I asked you about that little Rudolf Steiner example, because you just told me something that I just figured out now from our whole process that I recognized that was happening all the time. I mean, I knew it at the time, each moment it was happening, but now you just kind of gave it I don't know, not a name, but like you formalized it, which is this idea that whenever we would be doing our sessions, again, from starting last January up until the most recent one, a couple of weeks ago, we would be talking about an idea or a concept. I mean, the idea of how old is juggling, or like trying to think of something like concrete here, like we talked about, like where did the cascade come from, or blah, blah, blah. And whenever you would riff on something we were talking about for the show, in terms of like what we might say about it with our words on stage, you do pull in as many connections as you can that are just disparate connections, right? Like we're talking about this, and then all of a sudden you'll just pull in like one of your favorite ones, which is amazing, was the history of tools, or what was it?
Stone tools, yes.
Can you just say that really fast, because it's such a good one, and we didn't use it in the show, but we could do it here. What was the parallel?
Oh, it's just that when I listened to the first season of your object episodes, when you talk about the history of juggling in there, it's like there's this long period kind of where, from the Middle Ages and upwards, where basically, as Karl-Heinz Deaton, the main historian, said, this was mainly what they did. The cascade was the main thing of juggling that existed. You might juggle, maybe you juggled fire, maybe you juggled balls, maybe they juggled rocks, and they did whatever. But this stayed kind of unaltered. And then as we get towards Cinquevalli and we get towards Michael Motion, there's this sort of rapid increase of or rapid expansion of technique. And and this is, of course, it's mimicked in music. It's like first we have the Baroque, and then we have the Rococo, and then it goes into a stylistic pluralism. By 1940, we have everything going on at the same time. And then I saw that in stone tools, because in stone tools with the early humans had developed a stone tool, and then you can go, the rock shaped sort of like a teardrop shaped axe kind of thing. Once they invented that thing, it stayed unaltered for, now I can't quite remember, but like 1,000,000 years.
Yeah.
And then some new change came. It's like the, what are they called, Old Wiccan new tools, and there is some change of it where it's, but it's still a small thing, and then that remains for hundreds of thousands of years. It goes from like Homo habilis to Homo erectus, and by the time Homo sapiens comes on the scene, you have this explosion again of, well, we could not just make this one tool, we could make a really skinny one, which would be great for grating off the inside of the hide, whatever that's called in English. And all of those, they start making specialized tools, and they'd probably be, we go over to Orc over there. He's very good at making these kinds of tools. And then we go to Zagreb over here, who makes these kinds of things, or I don't know, or the woman who makes the perfect thing of whatever. So that was the kind of, just this thing of something staying in stasis, and that it expanded, and I'm going, I've seen this, I have thought about or been perplexed by this structure before.
So I mean I love that you tell that story now, because it's the same feeling I had when you first told it to me. We're working on a juggling show, we're talking about juggling, and now you're all of a sudden talking about stone tools. And I really struggled for many years. Like I just tell a little story. I don't think I ever told you this, but it's really connected into this process, which is, I've been teaching juggling at circus schools for about 25 years, we can say. And I've been working at the circus school in Stockholm for about 20 years, whatever, more intensely or less intensely, but whatever. It's been a couple decades. And when I first entered into teaching, I mean, after I started getting going, I realized that, how to explain this in a good way. So many people with juggling, they want to add other layers to it. They want to juggle and talk, or they want to dance or put music on it. They want to validate juggling through something else. Like, if you say, hey, I'm going to go juggle, people, it's, at least in culture, in my world, it's not so, it's whatever. But if you go, oh, I'm going to juggle and then do ballet dancing, oh, suddenly that's a thing, because ballet, that's like a valid art form. And so I kind of said, look, in my classroom, when I'm teaching juggling, what's wrong with spending an hour a day just juggling, not dancing, not doing music, not doing comedy, not doing clowning, not doing acrobatics? What's wrong with just doing an hour only on juggling? Because juggling is so unexplored. There are so many possibilities, right? And I'm not saying you can't combine juggling and acrobatics, but why not also spend an hour only on juggling and see where that leads you? Because that's been my experience in my life, is really dedicating to that practice. And I find so much value there, obviously. I mean, it's infinite to me at this point. And so over the years of teaching, I'm really into this thing where I have been really into this thing where it's like, yeah, but we're not doing clowning, we're not doing dancing, we're doing juggling. Let's juggle, juggle, juggle. And it's been so hard for me over the years in that process to express to the students that you can talk about stone tools, but it's still juggling, right? So that's the weird, for me, that's the struggle, where it's like, well, what do you mean? But you said we only have to, like, we can only juggle. Like, yeah, but now we're not in the classroom. We're doing a performance on stage. Everything is possible. It's still a juggling show, but we're going to talk about stone tools. How does that work? And then you just show how that works. You're pulling in connections of the material to other things in the world. And we're building a story, a narrative, abstract or linear, whatever. We're making connections, and we're trying to connect with the audience through this point of view. And so I find it, again, I'm struggling to articulate this point, but it's really deep. It's very meaningful to me, this idea that it can be a juggling show, and in the juggling show, you can eat sushi.
Yeah.
It's still a juggling show. The main impetus comes from the juggling. There's a connection between, you can draw a line. I mean, it's not random. It's not like we're going on stage and then like, oh, besides juggling, we can just talk about stone tools or airplanes, whatever. There's an intention, there's an idea, there's a consciousness. It's motivated from the juggling. It's not literally juggling. It's something else, but it's connected. And that's what I find really valuable, not just in the making a performance, but specifically in you, that you're good at, like when we jam on an idea, you pull in all these ideas, but you're not just like, oh, Jay said the word cascade. So now I'm just going to free associate any word that pops in my mind. Like it's not that. It's really directed and pointed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like, this is that thing again. It's trying to get my head around this thing of depth. It's like, that's in drawing connections and placing things in context. And that's what depth is that when you see the show, or when you hear the music, or when you hear the music with the words, it resonates on all these different levels or whatever. I just watched the Rolling Thunder review, that Martin Scorsese movie about Bob Dylan, and I respect Bob Dylan and everything, but I'm not like a huge Dylan fan. I've seen him live, and it was amazing, and I'm like standing there watching and going like, oh, this is cool. And some old guy came in and played a harmonica for a while, and I was like, oh, that's weird. And then someone goes, it's like, oh no, that was Van Morrison. He's like a legend on his own. This is a crazy thing. Anyway, I watched him, and Bob Dylan is in this sort of shaman phase, and I know from reading this book, the Death and Resurrection Show, by Rogan Taylor and Taylor Rogan. Anyway, from shaman to superstar, and he talks a bit about Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan uses all this language of circus. It's like, I'm like a trapeze artist, and a lot of that came from that he thinks of himself as the troubadour or so. And then seeing this guy who has these powerful songs, and on that tour or whatever, he debuts whatever, meets Hurricane, what's his name, that boxer that was framed, and all that, and he sings that song. Anyway, it's like he's just directly relating to what's going on politically. He has decided to do this tour where he wants to play small halls because he wants to connect with the people and not just play the arenas and that. And of course, it's crazy. He just plays these absolutely tiny towns. Like, he could come to Haugesund and play at that down here, and there's only 600 people. It's like a bingo hall because it's the biggest hall in town. And then he goes and he plays there. And he has this whole sort of outlook of where he talks. It's very arty and very crazy and whatever, but it's also, he's talking specifically about somebody who's currently in prison, who he's visited with and talked to, and he sings songs about that. And so this thing of where you feel like the person on stage is genuinely connected to, whether it is real life today, what's happening right now, or it is that they're just connected to history, their own, like talk about the history of juggling, or you could talk about stone tools or whatever, and it just becomes a point of view, something to grab onto or whatever. And I guess the idea is not just to go completely off into fantasy nebulous land of just like, oh, just draw in random words, and then, because I don't like this thing of like brainstorming. It's not a storm. We're focusing on,
that's true,
on something. I don't want to just go like, let's just throw random shit at this. It all needs to be connected, and if it's not validly connected, then you go the way with that. Not every opinion and every idea is not equally good. We have to
That's funny that you say that. I didn't realize that this entire process, we've never once done a brainstorm. I didn't think of that. Like that's kind of in one way amazing, because you would think that all we do is sit around and talk on video phone call all day long, that we're brainstorming, but it wasn't brainstorming at all. It was very intense.
But it needs to be concrete, because as the last year has proven, with hundreds of hours of talking, when you really just continually try to stay on point and try to work on something. So we've done 1 year of specific hardcore development and a week together in real life, and then you had a little bit more time, and then you started to do your sessions with people, and we pretty much after each session, not all of them, but more so, we would talk after the session, or sometimes I would look at the video of it and we'd talk again. Then we end up after the 6th session with a key issue, possibly the pivotal piece, theory-wise or idea-wise, of like, this is a complex idea. And it actually pivots around this thing that we talked about, the explosion of style that comes in stone tools and comes in music in 40s. And like, how do you convey that to the average person? And this is where I am. I'm really interested in this. How do you make something entertaining? Like, because we are
Well,
Sorry.
to be clear, it wasn't just how do you convey this to the average person or whatever you want to, how you say that, but to an audience. But it was like, how do you convey it to an audience, again, in a certain time frame in the middle of a whole other show? Because that little section could be a show in itself. We discovered it could be an hour-long thing.
And that's when you were sort of saying before, you go, no, and then you called me and you go, no, we need Frodo to riff on this, and it's me riffing, but it is also, I can't riff like that when I'm sitting alone. I am riffing like that because of the relationship that we've developed. So I know that I can talk in this kind of way directly or whatever. Yeah. But then when we got to that bit, not only did it need to be entertaining, always being like it's easy to follow and you can pay attention to this if you do not really care who Cinquevalli or Rastelli or anyone is. Like, you still need to be fun because you're just an average person. Not an average person.
Yeah, I hate that word, but that audience, you're just the audience.
You're just part of the general public. It's like your audience. You've bought a ticket to see a show and you want to have a good time. You could be intellectually stimulated, but they didn't go to see a university lecture. So we need to have that. That's one parameter. Then this show has already been made, and it turns out that there was and this was complex, and you discovered this, that there's the ratio of doing something, presenting new actual physical material, stuff that you would do in the space, not say. There was something off about the balance of that, because all of a sudden we have what I then you look at on the page and you go, there's too much text here, and you can see that without judging what the words are. You go, there's too many words at this point in the show, not enough action. So this was another parameter that it had to fit. And it was also the culmination of what's in essence Act 1. Like, if you're thinking act as in how it is in a play, that you get to the end of this and everything changes after this. This is like the point of no return, and we've been building towards it. So that's also like, it needs to feel like a peak. Other things we say, and it doesn't matter. They can just wash over them. Like they remember it, and that was a nice detail, or I felt a good emotion. That was funny when you told me that story, or that's all good. But then we get here, they're going, this is the thing which the show pivots on, and it goes into a whole nother space. So that was another parameter. It needed to structurally kind of peak, and it needed to peak in a cerebral way, because this is an idea in the show. So there were so many parameters.
Just to be clear, this idea that there was, too much text, just to qualify how that judgment was made, is because we had set up a rhythm before that. So I think, we could have had a show where that chunk of text could have been completely appropriate if all the other text before it had been equally chunky in that same way. But it was just like, before that, it was just like this much text, this much action, this much text, this much action, suddenly double the text. So you're setting up an expectation or a rhythm that the audience dives into that world with you, and then suddenly you kind of stray away from that thing that you've set up, and that's why it became a little bit clunky, or whatever you want to say, and we just streamlined it. And I think the new version, like I wrote you the message the other day when I did the new version on the floor for the first time out loud, I said it's very aerodynamic. I go, man, this feels so aerodynamic, like we're going somewhere, there's a momentum. And the other text didn't even feel like that internally. And I'm not saying the new text is going to feel like that with an audience. We have to wait and see. We don't know yet. But just the feeling inside of me is like, oh, now there's a movement to that crescendo.
But I still think it's like, when of course you're humble and going, we don't know if it's going to feel like that with an audience. But we always knew that section of the text, which is what we build towards, so that when you really go off on the deep end with your more experimental stuff, they look at that thing with eyes that they could not have had before, because you've heard this information now and you've seen everything that's led up to it. When you then pick up the magnet clubs, which is like which is still very much juggling, like they go, you understand it. You sit there and you go, whoa, this is amazing. I remember listening to some guy. Unfortunately, I can't remember who it was, but he's just basically, he's a composer and a professor of modern music, like modern classical music.
Right.
And he
Yeah.
just had a 2-part YouTube. He's got a YouTube channel.
This was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and he talks about how to listen to modern music. Like, you need to listen to it several times, and he's got many great points there. And that was one of the things that we talked about during this creation of going, like, if juggling is similar to music, similar to art, and we are going off on the deep end and making actual art, like where you go, is this juggling? Like some of the stuff that you do, is people question going, well, is this juggling? Like, well, when if you don't juggle rings, clubs, and balls, is it juggling then? Or like, what if you roll the flashlights on the floor like you did in the first show that I saw you do live, going, is this juggling? Or like, what is this? Or whatever. So anyway,
can you just say, I know you don't remember the musician's name, but do you remember the concept a little bit? You just mentioned it very briefly now, but you said, like, to listen to music, you have to hear it many times. Or can you expand a little bit more? Do you remember or no?
Yeah, well, it's just because the music isn't easy, because it is new. Because so much of what you take with music, like pop music, it's almost no music in the song. There's just a little phrase, and then that verse is repeated many times, and then there's the chorus and it's repeated many times. And it's the same, a rock song where it's like it's more or less just one riff, and then it goes off to do a little bit, and then there's little content in it. Sometimes if there's no melody and no discernible rhythm in it, and the instruments are coming at all these, it takes longer to grasp the structure of it. So that was just one. I can't remember all the other things. I should just go back and that again. That thing that you, there might be depth in here, but the first time you hear it, it might just feel like you don't know what to grab onto. It's because you're in the middle of the experience, and that to some extent happens when people watch my act too. Like, I do a slapstick act, and the first time they watch it, they go, oh wow, that was crazy. Like, I was there that day when you fell off the stage and you knocked the mic over, and then you see it one more time, and sometimes audience members feels like I just cheated them.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it was the same the next day. But other people, and
you fell off the stage. I mean, just to say, you fall off the stage every time is the
and the mic stand falls over each time and all of that. So you've created this experience, and then the first time when you see the act, you see the art. And then the second time when you see the act, you start to see the craft. And the 20th time you see it, you see the craft of now, because now you know what's going to happen. So now, instead of seeing me fall off the stage, you see what are all the subtle things that I do improvise into, so that this will seem like it was completely off the cuff at that time or whatever. I mean, that's maybe with the music.
I've heard a lot of magicians speak about that, right? So you see a trick and you're not a magician, so you don't know how the effect is accomplished, you don't know the method, and then you learn the method and it destroys your appreciation, it destroys your wonder and astonishment because you know how it's done. But then, because you study magic more and more and more, and you learn more and more techniques, and you get deeper and deeper into the magic thinking and the methods, then it becomes artistic again, because you go see a card mechanic or something and you say, well, I know how all those moves are done, and my goodness, it was just perfectly, what a great innovative, you start to find new qualities, and it becomes artistic again, or astonishing again, right, in a different way.
That's that same structure that I talked about in how the show is created. In a way, in the beginning it's just so expansive, then it's all the technique and getting it down in the line and learning all the things. It's like, you might look at the guy on the piano and you go, I know what he's doing. He's pushing sometimes the white keys and sometimes the black keys, and he's doing different things with both hands. I know what you're doing. I know the trick.
Right.
Trick. And then afterwards you go and you learn all of those things. And then for a while, it's just a mechanical kind of reproduction of something. And then eventually music will start to come out of it, not just noise and things you do, but the audience will now experience a flowing, organic new thing that comes when you can express yourself through the instrument.
But you just touched upon one of the kind of main thesis of our show that we've made in a very brief way. I mean, there's a couple of things we've dealt with, but one that we've confronted. But one thing is this idea that you do go see a piano player in a concert hall, and you don't say, oh, I get it. They're just pushing sometimes the white keys and sometimes they're pushing the black keys in different combinations. Oh, I get it. But because culturally, when you go see a musician in a concert hall, we expect to experience the sound, the quality of the sound, and not even the quality of the sound, but the emotion of the sound. That is something that's built into us. It's ingrained into us as a culture, as a society. But when you go see a juggler, you're not generally focusing on the emotion of the visuals.
Yeah.
You do the mechanical analysis. You go see a juggler and you say, oh, they're catching 7 balls. That sounds hard. Or, oh, they're catching 3 balls and then they dropped one. Well, that's not that's not a good experience for me, because you're focused on the mechanics of it rather than on the emotion of the visuals.
So true.
And I get it. It's cultural, right? Like in our society, juggling isn't viewed as a thing to experience emotionally. So that is one of a little right? Like that's kind of a thesis of our show, is how can we get an audience prepared to perhaps at least question if could there be an emotional quality to watching those visuals? Because for me, I just have to say very, very personally, this is just for me. I find I don't juggle because of the mechanics of it. I don't juggle. I mean, this is a story we don't tell in the show, but I'll tell it now because it's not in the show and it's nice to have it recorded. I used to juggle, started juggling when I was 8 years old, and I did, go juggle at grandma's house on Christmas. Oh, it's the local fire station is having a Halloween party, go juggle at the fire station. And then there were all these Cub Scout blue and gold banquets. And I would go perform there when I was like 12 years old. And I would go do my show for the Cub Scouts. I'm the same age as the audience, or, they're older than, what I mean? It's kind of funny. And after the show, I would get adults coming up to me and they would say, oh, wow, it was a really great show. It was really cool when you juggled 7 balls. That must be so difficult. And I really, really distinctly remember being a teenager. And when they would say to me, 7 balls must be difficult, my response was literally this. I would go, oh, is it? I guess so. I mean, I guess it's difficult for you because you've never practiced it. And so clearly it's difficult for you. This is like such a stupid statement. Of course it's difficult for you. You don't practice juggling. But I can juggle 7 balls and I'm not that special. The thing that is special about me, don't get me wrong, I'm not like suffering from a lack of self-esteem here. But my point is I worked really hard. So of course 7 balls isn't difficult for me because I can do it because I slaved for 12 hours a day for 5 years. And so is 7 balls difficult? I don't know. My point is it's a relative question depending on what viewpoint you take. Yep. But the other point too is that I didn't do it in the show because it was difficult. And I didn't have the language or the words to express why I juggled 7 balls or any of my other juggling until I was 18 or 19 years old. But basically I did it because it was an aesthetic experience. I mean, there's so many qualities I can outline about 7 balls. It's always, the pattern's always changing. It's a kinetic pattern. So it's almost like a mirage or like an optical illusion in one way. It's just a shape that I never saw in the world before. Like when I walk out in the forest in nature, I don't see a 7-ball pattern shape anywhere. So I find it very fascinating. I don't know. There's like all these aesthetic qualities. I find it very, in one way you could say emotional or connecting on a human condition kind of level.
It's a very human activity. Nobody does this.
Right.
And so it becomes a unique human expression. It's yeah.
And so because I've grown up having that internal feeling towards juggling my entire life, that's what we wanted to try to articulate or share with an audience through this show, right? That was one of the overarching themes of why we were speaking to the audience and not just showing the 7 balls, but because there is that barrier of skill. I mean, it's so hard. You're so confronted with the skill. I mean, I know, for example, just to, again, a little digression, but while we're on the subject, whenever I perform in England, it's always been a little bit of a challenge at the start of the show to get the audience on my side, because I found in England, there is this really weird at least to me, weird because I didn't grow up there. But there's this confrontation of like, oh, you're juggling 7 balls. You think you're better than me? Oh, you think you're better than me because you're doing 7 balls? Like, oh, who do you think you are? You think you're so special? And it's this weird cultural thing where you got to approach it from the, from the other side of like, hey, we all going to do this together. We're going to share this special moment. And it's not a confrontation because that skill normally is a confrontation a lot of times. Going back to the Cub Scout banquet, last story, and then I'll shut up and let you talk. But like, it's that idea of people come up to you again at the Cub Scout banquet and they say, wow, 7-ball juggling, man, I could never do that. And that was another comment when I was a teenager. On the surface, I understand the comment. I'm not stupid, and I'm not trying to be a smartass. But like this idea that I could never do it, I'm just like, I never asked you to do it. It wasn't a confrontation in my show. I didn't go on stage and be like, haha, I'm juggling 7 balls and now you try it. And I always thought when I was a teenager, I had this example of like, when I go to the dentist, or no, when I talk to someone and like, oh, what do you do? I'm a dentist. I'm like, man, I could never do a root canal. Man, that's like, I could never fill a cavity. Like nobody's asking me to because I'm not a dentist. And it's the same thing as, man, I could never juggle 7 balls. It's like, well, you're not a juggler. So I don't know. That's yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true. And I guess we're that last story or whatever, in a sense, we're dealing with that as well in the show in a very different way. But that's like found its way into the show, like this idea of this idea of or I'm better than you or whatever. That's contained within the show, and not like that, but it exists. So
true.
But it's interesting going back to the idea with the similarity it has with music and how you watch music, that you don't sit down and you watch Glenn Gould play the piano and he's playing Bach and you go, oh man, he's so good. Look how good he was at doing that. That's always difficult when you go F sharp, G, and then you jump to the C. That's amazing, like how he does that with the left hand. Amazing. Like, did you see him do that? It's like when he built towards that in the finale, and he did like the C sharp so fast. Like, it's like you're paying attention to the wrong thing at that point. And
culturally,
yeah.
You can't pay attention to that.
It's like, but if you were like, if you went to, because you can go as a musician and you might actually also enjoy it, because the thing about music or the thing about art or the thing about actually being in general, like the universe and everything, is that the universe and every kind of experience is always richer than you could ever fathom or ever talk about. It's always a multitude, and then when you're enjoying the piece of music that he's playing, or you're enjoying the poem, it's the fact that it's hitting all of those things. It is the technical skill too, but the ultimate purpose of the music is for you to connect to it and to move you and to stir the emotions. And I guess on a very sort of like hubristic and powerful large scale of it was what we wanted to do with this show, to take the audience to a point where the juggler in a sense becomes invisible, where I don't see Glenn Gould sitting playing the piano on the stage because I am completely listening to the Beethoven's Fifth Sonata. I'm completely listening to a Bach cantata or whatever it is. I'm only listening to the music, and we were trying to set them into an emotional space where they were ready to receive this.
I mean, that's exactly what Michael Motion did in his PBS special. He said, towards the end of the PBS special, Michael Motion in Motion, he does the 8 crystal balls wearing nothing but a skin-colored dance belt, like a G-string. And he does it on national public television in America in the early 90s, which is like completely crazy, right? With nudity and like conservative, values, PBS, like public broadcasting system. And he said, I stand behind my work so much. I have so much conviction that the crystal balls are the juggling technique is fascinating on its own, that nobody will complain that I'm naked, essentially naked. Yeah. And it's true. PBS did not get a single complaint about him being basically naked on TV, which is very, very obviously crazy. I mean, in America, you think one person would write in, right? But how cool is that he just said, like you were just talking about how the juggler disappearing, and then Michael comes and says, this is what I do, and then he stands behind it and he goes on national television basically naked just to prove his point, and it works. But what you just said was that thing, when you sit down to listen to music, there are these expectations about what's going to happen through experiencing music. And what we're confronting in this show, which we've never said in this way before, is what do people confront when they sit down and watch juggling? Like, what is the thing? And we used to have a line in the show, which we cut, which was impress or express, right? Yeah. And that's that confrontation. But I never thought about it in this really articulated way of like, hey, when I go see juggling, what the hell am I supposed to think? And I guess most people unconsciously are like, oh, I'm supposed to think that it's a trick that's hard to do, that they learn, you're juggling a knife or something, you might get cut, or there's a risk. It's about skill, difficulty, and risk, which is what we have in the show too. But that idea that can you sit down and have that, the expectation of that experience to be something other than the skill of it, that would be a fun, which is what Michael's whole point is, right? Like he's naked. Yeah. So yeah.
And it is, I mean, it is possible, but it is hard to make that happen. And we've done a big stab at it here, and we want to get people into that frame of mind of being able to see it by saying the right things and doing all the right things to the best of our ability. When we then go into the second part of the show, you will look at this, not like, it won't be like, oh man, my mind is blown, this is this, but you just place them into a frame of mind so that you can potentially see beyond the technique, see beyond the danger or whatever, and just start to see the juggling as its own thing. And then anything that you think while you are watching it, anything that you feel while you're watching it is, of course, okay. It's always a multitude of stuff that comes towards you. Sometimes when I'm listening to music and I'm walking, it's because I'm just listening to the music. A lot of the time I might also put it on, and then deliberately I'm putting on music of a certain nature because I am now thinking. But when music is on, patterns are going and all that, and it's like listening to classical music a lot when I'm in this mode, and then ideas come, or it's easier to think because it puts me in a certain mood, so I'm using it to amplify how I think. And I guess that we're sort of doing that a little bit here, like all of those things of ways you can use it, or the way you take it in, they're all valid. And we just want to sort of just step away so that you remember that you don't just have to look at how good you are at pushing the keys, or at catching.
I mean, I get this idea that we can find beauty anywhere in the world, and beauty again is a relative term, but just to keep the conversation moving here, I'll use that word beauty. And I get it that you can walk in the forest and then you can find the leaves on the trees very beautiful, and you can marvel at nature, right? And you can become overwhelmed by nature. And the thing is, though, like, I don't think so what I mean is without all this talking in our show, people could potentially come watch the juggling and just be overwhelmed by the beauty of humanity and blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, people don't do that. And I mean, I don't, like, sometimes I walk in nature because it's pleasant, and sometimes I walk in nature and I'm just like, wow, it's so marvelous. Those leaves are so beautiful, like in the autumn, so beautiful colors. But the thing is, I don't do it much because as an artist, there's something about intent and intentionality where I go, well, those leaves are, and this is probably a fault of my own, I'm not saying this is good, but, I walk in the forest and I go, well, those leaves are random. They weren't meant to be, particularly aesthetically pleasing, perhaps. So that's like maybe a bad example, but the one that comes to mind that's more relevant is, there's that video where the violin player is outside in the subway playing, Bach or whatever. And they had just played Carnegie Hall the night before, and tickets were $500. And it was sold out, and they got a standing ovation. And the next morning they went outside the subway in New York City, and then they're just playing on the street, and nobody stops to watch them. And look how messed up we are in the world. And I just hate that video because it's like, Of course nobody should watch him. It's the wrong context. There's no context. They're going to work in the morning. I would also not stop and watch him if I had to go to work in the morning. If I was, I didn't want to be late and fired from my job, so I didn't get money, so I couldn't pay my rent or get food to eat. Like, shut up. Like, it's such a, it's obviously a very manipulative, like contrived video, but that larger idea of just like, oh my goodness, we don't even stop to take time in this world to look at beauty. Maybe it's true. Maybe we should all pay a little bit more attention. But my point is this: if I was walking through a forest and I said to you, hey, Frodo, check out these leaves. Aren't they beautiful? You could go like, oh yeah, they're pretty nice. But what if I said this? Hey, Frodo, you know what, dude? Surprise, we're in this forest, and this whole thing was constructed by Eric Oberry. And those leaves he put one by one to place them. Take a look. Wouldn't you look at it with a different sort of attention?
Yes, exactly.
So it's not random, and that's what I'm talking about with our show. We're trying to put a pointed focus on. I crafted this juggling in the show with the idea that it's emotionally and aesthetically composed, and not composed from the standpoint of look how hard this is or look how risky this is, right? And that's what we're trying to clue the audience in on. Like, hey, you could just watch all this stuff and think, oh, it's beautiful if you were, so inclined, but actually this person meant for it to be beautiful. And we're just cluing you into that in case you might want to look. The same thing if me and you were walking in a forest made by Eric Oberry, right?
Yeah. So much to pick up on in that, but just on a very sort of direct thing, it's like directly as to what is in the show. It's like we come to this crux of what we've made. The point has been made. The first act of the play is done, or the show is done, and now we're moving into the other one and going from magnet clubs into the sticks. You have, it's not, the magnet clubs are now all of a sudden very beautiful, but a lot of the risk involved in juggling is that you could drop, and so there is still some risk in the magnet clubs.
Yeah, it's
when we go over onto the sticks, then, which is the next sort of section or whatever after that, there's more to it than that, but then the three sticks that are tied together in one thing in an apparatus that as far as I know nobody else has ever used, and you juggle it, and you can see because of all that comes before it that this is juggling, but you've taken away that last kind of thing. You could say, oh well, if you're swinging those sticks around and maybe it's swung in the wrong thing, but you can't drop them anymore, so you've even taken that away. And it's like this incredible beauty that comes out of being able to see that, and you don't go, hang on, is this juggling? What does this mean? Like, you can't, like, what? And you don't ask those questions, but you have been led to it to be able to see this one piece, which is like, which really pushes the boundaries of what you previously thought was juggling, like John Cage having the silence in 433. I was there's a 432. That was a different take.
The version wasn't as successful. Like, it was failed draft.
It was an excerpt. It was excerpt from the thing.
The swinging sticks is definitely a conversation we've had over this whole past year, right? It was a very symbolic conversation. It was like the swinging sticks stood in for that, all those qualities you just outlined, where it was like, okay, if I just come out and do a show and I start with swinging these three sticks around, maybe some people are confused. Some people go, that's not even juggling. Or people go, what is he trying to do? Because I've had that before in my life with the swinging sticks. People go, what are you doing?
What's it supposed to be? What does it mean?
Yeah, and I get it. Again, I'm not stupid. I get what they mean. But on the other hand, I'm just like, does it matter what I'm doing? Like, does it matter what you call it? Like, can you please just watch what I'm doing? And then maybe you'll get some value out of that. And that's what we tried to do, was like, okay, by the time we get to the swinging sticks, we hope, the plan is the audience is ready to see them and they're happy to see them. They don't have to like it, but they're not sitting there confused and distracted. Because that's, for me, the big thing about performing is, like, let's say I start swinging the sticks, right? In whatever context. If you're watching it and your first thought is, what is he doing? That's taking you out of the experience. And that's not part of the experience I'm intending, which means probably while you're thinking, what is he doing? You're missing the first, 30 seconds of choreography that I am intentionally designing to show you to build up to whatever in the world I'm trying to do, right? So for me, the whole game of performing, one of the aspects is, right, you want people to be in it with you all the time. You don't want them being taken out by their own thoughts that are distracting. Like they can have their own thoughts, but hopefully they're thoughts that are related to that are keeping them in the moment with you together in the same room, and not just mentally escaping to some other like unwanted thought, especially an unwanted thought where it's like, oh, that light change, was that intentional? That looked like a mistake. Was that a mistake? Did something break? And then this whole conversation's in your mind while whatever's going on stage is like, I had a friend who he was directing a show, and the show was supposed to be about something about Las Vegas or whatever. And it was a very straightforward song and dance number with, show performers and whatever, with feathers and glitter and sparkles and stuff. And then he thought, oh, it would be so nice that this is so cheesy and so straightforward and it's so cliche. And that's, in one way, it's so banal, right? It's so boring. Like people aren't even watching this because they just, oh, it's a show about Vegas and there's like a show dance number. You don't even see it, right? So he thought, oh, it would be so great that in the middle of the dance piece, a light falls from the ceiling and smashes on the stage. Like nobody gets hurt, but like that would wake people up. And so they did this show where the light falls. The only problem is, it looked real. So of course the audience was freaking out, and it didn't really engage them. It just made them just completely distracted for, the first half of the show or whatever. Cause like, oh my God, somebody almost died. And like, it's really traumatic, right? So this idea of like keeping an audience, curator of time and attention is your phrase about an audience, keeping their attention, but keeping them in the moment. Anyway, that just came out of the stick thought.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's really interesting that it's you gotta, if you do that, you need to, now the whole show has been diverted. Now you need to take on this fact. And if that was the only thing that happened, then it doesn't make any sense. But if things keep falling down, and then in the end they're still out there and everything is broken down, and somebody's trying to raise the flag again of Las Vegas in the rubble or whatever, then it's like, okay, now that's become the theme of the show, and they realize that as they go along or whatever.
Sure.
But if it just happens, then it just pulls you out. You always have to question, like, why are we doing this? It's like you can always just go, okay, well, because one way to solve the crux that we were working on in our final creative session on the show after the 6 performances about this, well, it's like difficult to keep people's attention or whatever in a way. That was like you going, when there was just a small group of people, they were all paying attention because it was so small. But then when you got a bigger one then it was hard or whatever. But that within, sorry?
No, when it was a small group of people, it's harder to hide in a group. Oh, yeah. When it's 6 people
pretending to pay attention.
Yeah, when it's 6 people, I mean, it's easier. I think it's also humanly easier to pay attention for real, because you're just like, well, we're all in it to the same level, right? Where if it's a group of 20 people, you can have 1 or 2 people who kind of hang back. I mean, there's a social currency to the situation, right? That enables these behaviors, even from inside yourself, truthfully. So yeah.
No, it's I dropped a little bit what it was that I was building towards there, but
talking about was the attention, and the reason why it was harder to keep the attention at the show was just because it was so much information. It was hard to understand, and it wasn't that I don't think it was that people were bored. I don't think it was that people were uninterested. I think it's that people were just they just had to struggle. It wasn't effortless, and you talk about effortless.
All the time, and that is like, and in this case here, the issue was like we jiggled around on the words, but essentially it's the same words. We jiggled around on a little bit. We found another way to divide them up, but the problem, as I saw it there, was that it was structural. There was something wrong with the structure of the show. We'd set up a flow that was not apparent in here, so people were finding, and it was like there was too much information, too many ideas in too short a time. We couldn't do it anymore, and we were going all these pet ideas that we can't kill any of our darlings. We have to do it. And then you go, so people are drifting. But what we could, of course, have done to make sure that people were paying attention is that you just go, and that is where Cinquevelli came in, and then you just pop the paper bag, bang, and they all go, whoa. And that's how Michael Motion came in. Now you got their attention,
right.
but their mind is still wandering, and they're going. So you need to draw the attention in an appropriate way for the time as well, or like for the time and the content that you're expressing. So it's not just enough to get their attention or to just, okay, hey, just lie down on the floor and slam for a little bit, and then everyone goes, what the hell is going on? And then you get up and you go, okay, as I was saying, I'm making a point. So yeah, there's always that balance between you're gonna have their attention, but I think there is a separation between attention and interest. I think in the beginning you can bang the bag and you can wave the fire like in a street show, and you can scream and you put on loud music, and then that catches your attention. But if that just continues to happen, like you see in like a child's cartoon or whatever, it's just flashing colors and there's joking, it's just going faster and faster and faster. There's no time for you to go, oh, maybe I should go and do something else or whatever. It's just barraging. Then at some point you hope in a show that's lasting an hour and a half that the attention morphs into interest. In the moment of in the beginning, you have all these things that will catch your attention, and we're dealing with that in this show. We fully have found a way to solve and bring you in like that, and to make you able to listen to you, make some other ideas, to convey some more ideas. But by that point, you've dazzled them with your technical skill, and you just go, wow, this is juggling is everything I thought juggling would be. And now what's this show going to be on for the rest of the show?
Yeah.
And in there, you're becoming interested. You throw out already, as those people who have seen some of the teasers that you've put out, where you're driving down through the Valley of Fire and all that. And there's a theme of space in this show. And we're using it's like literal space travel, like in terms of NASA and whatever. And there's also then like the juggling in space and whatever. And by the time you are into this first bit, you are now, I hope, and I think that people are now interested. They're not just paying attention to it because you continue to do high, low, fast, slow, which is the juggling axiom of you're pulling them into something which is a larger idea that actually now is going to take 25 minutes before we get to the point of this thing. Along the way, you'll be laughing and you'll go all this stuff. But when we wrap up that bit that we've just described was difficult, part of the reason why it was difficult is like in a good crime novel, it needs to be, what is it that I say? It needs to be surprising. It needs to be inevitable, yet surprising.
Right.
I think it is in this one.
No, totally. I mean, magicians talk about that all the time too. I mean, I never told you this before, I don't think, which is insane. Because there has been this theme of space travel, space exploration in the show as kind of a B story, or like a secondary layer, like a counterpoint almost to the other stuff, the juggling. But do you know why it's there, Frodo?
Is it because you too are a space explorer? You're exploring space and objects in space. Is that why?
Very close. It's because there's a spectrum of the definition of juggling. And on one end of the spectrum, it's like you say, it's called n+1, which you tell me what n+1 is. You have a better...
I don't know. No, n+1 is just like it's the hands. It's that to juggle something, you need to have more objects juggle. One ball in the air, one in each hand.
One more than
in hands.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you have two, n stands for the number of hands, for example. Yeah. So you see, if you have one hand, n+1, then it's 2 balls.
Yeah.
If you have 2 hands, it's 3 balls, etc. That's on one end of the spectrum of juggling, which is very rigid. That's a very rigid. It's a mathematical formula, for heaven's sake. Like, it's pretty rigid.
So it's serious, yeah.
Yeah, but on the other end of the spectrum is the sun and the planets and the moon and the earth are juggling themselves in the orbit in space. So it's like going from the most rigid definition of juggling to everything, literally everything in the universe is juggling.
Yeah.
And that's the spectrum.
Molecules to the planets, to the galaxy, Please.
And normally you'll find people on either end of the spectrum. You'll get people who are hardcore. No, but the planets are circling and juggling themselves. Everything is juggling. Like that's one end of the spectrum. Or then on the other hand, they're just like, you're using 2 balls and 2 hands. That's not juggling.
Okay.
And so
everybody knows anyway that the planets aren't juggling themselves. It's God or Jesus that juggles those, I think.
Sure. Or
anyway, so he's the juggler of those. So it is juggling.
No, totally. And so in the idea we have this. I mean, sorry, in the show there is this kind of theme of space travel, and the origin of that is to confront this kind of I think this fantastical spectrum of what is juggling. And now just to say, and the reason I thought of that, and I don't know if I ever told you that, which is hilarious, because for me it was just so obvious that it took me a year and a half after we made, and it took us to make the whole show for me to even tell that to you because it was so obvious, Frodo. But like, no, but like the reason I thought of it now is because that is about the definition of what is juggling, right? It's the spectrum of what could be juggling or be considered juggling. And that is how we fixed that little part of the speech that we've been talking about this whole recording.
Where we fixed the flow, yeah.
We fixed the flow, and it was through the perspective of the definition of what is juggling. And that just recalled to my mind that this idea of space travel isn't just another fantastical like random arbitrary layer, which I am interested in space travel, but there is a connection there of like juggling too.
Yeah.
Like the stone
tool. When you ask me to come up with something, I just write down, because if you look at what juggling is, it is an exploration of space through yourself and through juggling. Like you could also say dance is that. Like you wouldn't say that poetry is a exploration of space. That's maybe more an exploration or an expression of inner space, but that's a different, I don't know. I just like, and I see that.
If we dial that spectrum back down a little bit, that of the planets juggling and the N+1, there is a definition that a lot of jugglers today like to identify with, and I identified with it the first time I heard it, but I'll tell you the problem. But the definition is a little bit like juggling is the organization of objects in space and time. And I think there's an intuitive connection there. When first time you hear that, you go, oh yeah, because it speaks to something that's beyond skill, difficulty, and risk. And we can all pretty much recognize, at least on a small 1% level, that there are other qualities in a lot of the new juggling coming out, at least, like the swinging sticks. Well, they're tied together. It's not going to hit the ground. How can I value this? How can I understand this and watch this thing? And then it's like, oh, it's the organization of objects in space and time. Sounds awesome until you realize every single thing you do is the organization of objects in space and time. Like eating food or tying your shoes or driving a car. It's an object in space and time. So it doesn't.
This also speaks to this thing that I talked about in the beginning of how I take neurology and the making of the Western divided brain and the making of the Western world, and how I tie this into what I do. And I think it comes from like just this whole thing of mastery. If you master one subject, one idea, if you get a solid metaphysical point of view, you know how the world works or whatever, you have some things that you think this is the real, then from there you can now, in that way that I said, that it's input and the transformation. That transformation is when you look at the world in this way, what do you see? The world is infinite in its potential interpretations. Like whenever you try to tie something down, you can always look at it from a multitude of ways. Even when you're just when you look at your computer screen, there's the back of it that you can't see unless you change your point of view and all that. So if you master one thing, which I call it showmanship, because I find I am interested in juggling, and I'm interested in sword swallowing, and I'm interested in group acrobatics like Gravity and other myths are doing. There's not something that I could ever participate in. I'm not that skilled in those things, but I'm interested in it, and all of that's why it's sort of a showmanship. But by having this one point, that one lens through which you can then look at the world, you can now talk about many, many different subjects, because you have a kind of firm point of view. And as Archimedes says, you give them a firm place to stand and a lever, and then you can pivot and you can literally move the world. So if you just have that, I think that's part of the key. And that's what we're doing in this show as well. Like if everything goes back and going, this definition needs to be open enough so that it's interesting for exploration, but it mustn't be so big that there is no separation now between juggling and something else. Yet, on one ontological level, like on what the nature of juggling is, what is juggling, it is also that. It's that, but that's not quite specific enough. So we almost like juggling is so many things, just like music is so many things.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, it can be. And yeah, the possibility of connection and relationship is there. And to kind of point out those relationships, I think is the valuable thing. And then let people, connect with those or not. Like just to point out and say, this is all happening. And it's a point of view, because that's our job as artists, I think, is to have a point of view and an opinion. And because I've been juggling for 35 years, to share that 35 years of experience of looking at juggling as a relationship in different ways. Of course, you shouldn't do that. That's my job, to share that with you. Well, if I can, maybe we can have an eye towards the end of this conversation.
Yep.
I have a little place where I'd like to go, and I have two final subjects maybe to talk about for today. One is just this idea, going back to the process. One thing I've realized over this past, well, it's a year and a half, but let's say really year of deeply intense work with you is, and I've told you this a few times, but don't take this the wrong way. No, but because on the surface, it sounds like a backhanded compliment. But like one of the best things about working on this show with you was just having someone to talk to. Like, don't get me wrong, because not just
I get it.
But you're not just
I am incomprehensible to most people, I feel like.
You're not just someone. but to be on this journey together with someone this deeply has been such a relief. It's been so meaningful. I can hardly even express what it's meant to me. I tried to. I wrote you a little email when you were on the boat. I tried to tell you what it meant to me, but like just this idea of like, hey, there's someone there and I have a thought about the show and I can send you a voice message on Facebook and you'll listen to it. Just even that you listen to it is meaningful in the way that it gets my thought out in a different way. I'm not always in my head. So many times in my work, in my life, I'm just in my head trying to make this stuff happen. And I get as far as I can get, but then the conversation doesn't go any farther because I'm the only one in the conversation and all the ideas are there, like they're done, and just to have someone to bounce ideas off of, that's been kind of the most, the greatest part of the whole experience was just to have an extra person there. And that it was you was also, of course, incredible. I mean, it's one of those like really fundamental things of like my whole life, people were telling me you should get a director. And I never found someone I could have that conversation with. Like we can have a conversation clearly. One that never ends, but it's one of those just very basic principles, like very basic things that I never really did. And maybe we could get into the whole like arc of my career. Like, for example, maybe I didn't have a director before because I wasn't ready for one. And like, we could go into that whole journey, but for me, it feels like very basic, on a very fundamental level. Like, why did I not do this before? And it's kind of like in the start of the pandemic, I organized my studio. And this is so stupid, man. But like one of the first things I did is I took all of my props that were in suitcases, because that's how I stored my stuff, was just in big suitcases piled up in my studio. And I got clear plastic boxes. And I put all the stuff in boxes and I separated them out and I put them on a shelf. And it like revolutionized, like it's so pathetic. It revolutionized my artistic experience, because now when I go into my studio, I can see everything that there is and I don't have to have it just stuck in my own mind, right? And when I go do a gig now, I can go, I've done this so many times now, I walk into my studio and I'm like, oh, I got to pack for that gig in Portugal, and I'm like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. And then I look, oh yeah, I forgot I have that thing too. Oh, and there's that thing too, because I can see them in the boxes. And it's just so banal. It's like kind of embarrassing even to say it like this, but it was such a revolution in my work to get clear plastic boxes. And I find that on the same level of just like stupidity of like, why did I never include someone in my artistic process before? But to say really honestly, I never had the chance to before. And it's definitely not in the way of to work with someone like you before. But it's been such a relief to not only be in my own mind all the time. Yeah, I just wanted to say that.
It's so true though. Like, it was also because it was also during the pandemic, so there was no gigs, and it was a real existential time for me. Like, I couldn't do my job. It's the only time in my life where I, for a while, had to wonder what to do, because everything that I did was related to groups of people getting together, and I could do many different things, but it's all related to having a group of people to talk to or somehow be in front of or whatever. So having you to talk to all the way throughout this thing, and people, and to be able to talk at such depth and go really far out, and then go, all right, we've now spoken for an hour on the chat, we need to go get back to the show. How does this specifically now go into the show? Because we need to make sure that the show is progressing as well. Like, we can have all these ideas, and now we go there. Now also that sort of wide expanse puts you in a certain frame of mind. So now when you then go down to, all right, so you just finished you're doing the Newton's cradle, and we've said this, so now what happens, and what how does this go, or whatever. So it creates a certain mood when you're doing all this lofty talking, and then you look at how do you put this into the work. And it's not like we then went, oh, okay, so here we have this abstract idea, how can we represent this idea that now sort of it appeared to us through me and you talking about piano playing and invisible piano player, because you just see the music. We didn't sort of go, okay, how can we translate that idea and represent it and make it. It wasn't quite like that. A lot of the time it's like it's this back and forth. Sometimes it's an idea that needs to be spoken in the show, sometimes it's an idea of the tone or the theme, but to have this ongoing conversation back and forth, and having somebody else just take your work seriously enough to listen to it all the time, to watch a piece several times before I comment. And my strength is not abstract putting acts, putting together which juggling trick is here or there. Like, I usually deal with different structures in my own work than just abstract movement or whatever. But through our conversations, I now have a better understanding of juggling composition and all this. And sometimes just by me being ignorant and going, well, I watched your magnet clubs, and I like how they stick together like this. And then when you balance them then again, this is a triplet, this is a trilogy of movement in the space, and that's nice. So whatever.
Yeah.
Just asking, was that intentional, or was this bit is that this? Am I seeing the right thing? Because you just sent it to me and going, here, I made this, and I'm going like, okay, how do I respond? And then just having someone, and now there's a conversation, because I go, I saw these things, I didn't see them first because I needed to watch it 3 times to understand what's going on in here.
Yeah.
But the piece comes halfway through the show, so we're hoping that by the time that starts, you will be able to pay attention from the beginning. But it's different. I'm looking at it on my phone, and it's a little bit of, I'm looking at you juggling. So that I think is a really valuable thing in all processes, whether I'm working on a family show that's going out, which is a completely different kind of mode of expression. But just to take that thing, we're talking to children here and adults at the same time, versus this is a show that is not unsuitable for children, but particularly not the first 10 minutes, but the sort of middle, there's going to be a 25-minute thing there that is speaking to someone who are a little bit more cognitive aware, but it's punctuated with juggling all the way through, so they'll still like it, but it's not a children's show.
Right.
Anyway, no matter what, just having that conversation with someone and really listen to someone and take the work completely seriously.
Yeah.
Even when it's as ridiculous as what we do here, or that when they're going to juggle a rubber chicken or whatever, like, to take that seriously, that's just been, for me, in having all these thoughts, I take it so seriously, the content and structure and characters of what we do as performers, like what this activity of performing, I take it so seriously, and it's been so amazing to have that with you just over this time, to have gone, there is somebody out there who really gets me. Because I talk to my wife, I talk to people, and sometimes I'm just like, I am on another planet. I make some leap of going, oh, well, the juggler is a lot like a shaman, and I go, what the fuck is this guy on about?
Well, so this idea, so the reason I thought of this idea of like, it's just been so nice to have you along on the journey, just to have another brain, to share this with, is because this whole journey, especially a year ago, I kind of wanted to end today going back again to sticking on this 1 year ago, going to New York in a couple of days with a finished show. And a year ago, we started making that show in earnest. And man, I still can't comprehend it. I still can't even talk about it. Like, it's so weird that we spent a year and we made this thing and the journey we've been on. I should be able to articulate that. Maybe next time we record, we can jump deeper into that. But I just want to go back to a year ago. And the thing is, I really remember the sensation. And you have this turn of phrase you said about Cinquebelli a few times recently, where he was pulling juggling into existence. And I feel like a year ago, Frodo, you were really pulling this show into existence. I mean, we both were. And I really think about this phrase, making something from nothing. I think about that a lot in my work. We made something from nothing. We had nothing. We didn't have a show. And then we made a show. It's whatever. It's the process of creation. It's what we do as artists. I don't need to sit and gaze at my own navel and be so, stunned. But like, I am kind of stunned by this show because we really did start. You were trying so hard at the beginning in those first sessions in January to pull something into being so that we could have a conversation and start to figure out what the hell we were going to do. And I just want to ask you, do you remember a year ago in January, what were you thinking? What were you feeling? What did you think the show was back then? What were you trying to do? Were you freaking out? Were you just like, man, this juggler guy wants to make a show. Like, what's he going to do? Or were you just like, no, man, there's 20 shows in here. Like, what did you think a year ago?
I was not nervous. I had seen your extensive YouTube channel and watched hours of you perform and whatever. And I'd seen your TED talk and I'd seen you live and had conversations with you and at Ronald's Donuts. And it's just really good to talk to you and whatever. So I was not nervous of what we were going to create because the depth of it and the scope of it or whatever would just depend on the amount of time and attention that we would give to the project. It really, like, some of those initial ideas that we had in the very early conversations are still very much present in this show. You had resistance towards some of the ideas that I had, and that resistance is also, that's where the gold came from in many ways. It's like the best things come from this going, well, how would we do this? Because I think there's something valuable in this idea. And you go, I don't know, is this too cheesy? I don't want to do just that. And then the synthesis of us coming together, that's sort of how the show is created. And you always start with it going, not knowing. And this thing of, it's not just present, but it's sort of presencing. It's coming into being. Every time you talk, you know more about it, and you keep having this feeling, like you said, it's like, oh, now we know what the show is because we've talked about this idea, and then you write that down, and it's like, oh shit, we just spoke for an hour and a half, and that ends up being 6 lines of talking, and then you do the 1-up pirouette and a 3-up pirouette. And it's like, did we take an out? Like, what is going on here? Like, I thought that was the show.
Right.
It's like, or whatever. And you keep deepening what it is, and it keep adding to it, and it keeps growing and being interconnected. So I trusted that the process would work more so than in most cases, I would say.
I see. I mean, one thing you reminded me now is like when you talk about my resistance to ideas, like occasionally or whatever. I mean, it's a conversation between two humans. So obviously that ebbs and flows as that does.
It's a conversation. If we just sit and say the same thing back and forth, then it goes nowhere. Then it's just like you're alone. We need to be able to throw stuff at it and go, those are not my words, but I see where you're going with this.
No, that's what I wanted to say. So like, I just wanted to get this out of my brain so I remember it since we're recording this, but like, I don't think you ever told me an idea, Frodo, that I was like, I don't want to do that. But you definitely told me, like, our conversations were so effortless generally, like they are today, again, just to say that, like, the ideas you would throw at me would always spark my brain to the next step. Yeah, there was a few times, 2 or 3 or 4 bigger times where you would say something and I didn't immediately know what was the next thing to say. And those were the moments where I was like, like you would say, you know how me and you talk, like we always did video call, right? Generally. And like we're nodding and we're pointing, using our hands. And then sometimes you would, and you would be on a roll. You'd be like, you should do this and we could do this. And there's this idea and this idea. And I'm like, yeah. Great. And then sometimes you'll say something and I'll just be like, I'll go like this, like, I don't really know.
Yeah. And then immediately I start to rephrase my ideas, and I'm going, okay, I see what the flaw in this is. I'm on the roll, but I'm on the slight wrong tangent. The idea is still good, but it's.
But like whenever I'm like, I don't know. I guess what I'm meaning is like deep inside me, I'm just like, that's probably a good idea. I don't know what to say to it right now, or like the path isn't straightforward for me. Especially if it was something about juggling, because then I just know immediately, like, well, my technique is like this, or my juggling goes like this, and I can immediately just throw that in there. If you're like, hey, Jay, you should do some juggling like here, and I'll be like, yeah. It means I know what I'm gonna do. And then if you're like, but you should juggle over here, and then I'd be like, what's that gonna be? That's gonna be some work. That was always like kind of how it went in my mind. But then what I was gonna say is, in January, I do remember a lesson that I learned talking to you, which was, I think in our first couple of sessions, you would say, we were talking about, because I was going to speak on stage, and you would say, yeah, but Jay, you could say, X, Y, and Z, and you would say something out of your mouth. And in my mind, because we were still figuring out how our process was going to go, in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to say that on stage, like out of my mouth, I'm going to say those words. And pretty quickly, I'd say after the first session even, I started to understand that whenever you said something out of your mouth, I needed to translate it in my mind for my world. And then it started to just flow. But that first day, man, I was sweating. I was like sweating and struggling, because I was like, man, whatever Frodo's saying sounds good, but I can't pull that off. This is going to be a heavy, oppressive project. I mean, this is going to be like a big work. And then after a while, I'm like, oh, when Frodo says this, what he's really getting at is an intention and an idea. And how can I? And then immediately, and then then we could have a really good conversation, because in my mind, I'm translating as I go.
And that is that thing of translating. That to me is not just the key artistic process of, like, you get some input, now you're translating it into yourself, and this becomes your artistic output. It's the whole the whole fundamentals of human conversation or human interaction with the world. It's like the world comes in and then I say something, and that's what the conversation is. I'm looking at your subtle cues that my idea is not landing, but I still, and sometimes I'd go, yeah, okay, whatever. And then we'll skip it and go to something else. But sometimes I go, no, there is something in this one, but I have not been able to convey it to you yet.
Totally.
I need to say it again. So can tell by your face, some things in your face that, no, this is not landing. And I'm going, no, but there isn't point here. And then I'd try to shift it to go, look at it from this point of view, look at it from this point of view. And then sometimes we'd go, yeah, I get it. And then still after, even though we now both fire it up about it, then impressing versus expressing has just, we both cared a lot about that. And it made its place, different places into here and there. And it's a really important point. But in the end of the day, I was one of the darlings that just didn't end up fitting into the show. It's there in the gestalt of the whole thing, but it is not being spoken ever or whatever.
Right.
So or sometimes we just, that's been this thing of translation, like hear what I'm saying here, just listen to the words, but I'm not literal in the same way. It's like he didn't actually walk on the water. Maybe he didn't, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but it's like that's not the point here. Like it's what happened to the people when he was in the boat, and now we are 2,000 years later and we're still going on about it. So it's a good story. It's like Star Wars. It's like it came out in 1977 but still exciting now.
I came out in 1977. I was born then.
76.
There you go. No, I mean, maybe that's like a nice point to maybe wrap this up. It reminds me of one thing really fast, just to say this idea, what you were just saying about translating in a conversation and taking things seriously, taking each other seriously. It reminds me, it's the introduction to my book, 5 Catches, my book about juggling I wrote like a lifetime ago. But in the introduction of the book, it's about Luke Wilson, who was a amazing artist, juggler, one of my best friends. And unfortunately, he passed away from cancer. But we had a conversation. I got to talk to him about this right before he was gone. And he said, we had this moment of realization where he was just like, but Jay, I always thought you were right about everything. And so I was really intimidated by you because you were always right about everything. So, because me and Luke, we used to argue a lot, like really big arguments. I mean, not personal arguments, but like about heated discussions about, conceptual ideas. We really, really arguing with each other. And he was always like, yeah, but I was always so intimidated by you because you were right about everything. And the hilarious thing is I said, what are you talking about? That's exactly how I feel about you. And that was our relationship, that seriously, until we had spoken that out loud to each other, I was like, man, Luke Wilson, he's right about everything all the time. And it's so hard to,
it's so annoying.
Sometimes it's so hard to be in a conversation with him because I can't keep up, because he's so right and he's so good and he's so smart and and then he was doing the same thing back to me, but I didn't know it. So we would build each other up. And I think that's what me and you have. Like, I always take all your ideas super seriously. So I'm like, man, Frodo's like one of my favorite performers ever, smartest dude I know, like such a, like really, I have so much, esteem for your work and your thoughts, that whenever you say something to me, even if it doesn't immediately make sense to me, especially if it doesn't immediately make sense to me, I'm just like, whoa, I got to really confront this idea. I got to confront what he said. I got to take it, I got to figure it out. And it can be a struggle, but I think it's that then building each other up and having that mutual respect of those ideas that really pushed the show, into existence. I just have to say, it feels like
it's like when we have that, when the conversation is like, it's the conversations kept being bigger than just the words or whatever. It's a synergy, and that was what the show is too. I think we've really created a really deep show. It's got connections infinitely within itself, but also infinitely with the world. So whatever you take with you when you come into this, you will see slightly different things, and there's so much in there. So there's definitely bits that are like outright poetic, both in visual styles and in literal words that you say.
Right.
It has quite literal factual things that are being said that goes on, and that is a long thought that's developed over a long time. And it also has these snippets that now ties back to all those things, and it has overarching themes that goes as wide as space travel, and it has things which are as personal as just, or as small as just one person on the stage, one object, and you throw and catch. And it's like it really has this scope.
That's true. I didn't think of that before. That's totally true. That's actually pretty cool. Great. Well, so we're at about 2 hours now, so we could stop recording and maybe do another session another time. And maybe if we do, I'll say it now before, so it's saved in case I forget it, but we could talk more about the nuts and bolts of the process, the rhythm of the process. Just on a more practical level, I think would be good for us as well to remember.
That could be really good, and to talk about the specifics of okay, then we did this, then we did that, then we wrote all of this, to sort of give a more, that's good, more practical, focus on the practical, not go so conceptual, just literal things like using Messenger.
No, totally. Like
type to text.
Yeah. No,
not type to text. That was already type to text has already been speech to text.
Yeah.
Type to text, we already knew that, but
oh, sounds good. Hey, let's take this conversation off this recording now, and we'll
all right.
Talk to you in a second.
It was such a pleasure.
Bye everyone. Yeah, thanks, Frodo. You're the best.